See? It pays off sometimes. Hey, it's Soul, and this is Warcraft Weekly, and man, this has been such a good week. Anyway, you can help support the channel by liking this video, subscribing for more WoW coverage, and catch me live when I'm streaming. There is a lot to recap and highlight from the Warcraft Direct, which I think turned out to be very successful, even if not everyone got what they wanted. But I admit, even if the Direct had nothing but the final minute or two of it, I would be hella happy anyway. So let's take a look at what is ahead first. A quick overview while we guesstimate the timeline of the War Within all the way up to midnight. 11.0.7 is coming the week of December 17th, so pretty soon, and with it we're going to get Siren Isle and some new quest lines. We're going to get that overpowered ring and updates to Winter Veil. According to the calendar on the PTR at least, Turbulent Time Waves will begin the week of January 7th, right after the anniversary event, and that ends February 25th. Also on the calendar, Plunderstorm is shown to start January 21st and end on the 24th. So if the calendar is right, and it isn't always right, it stands to reason patch 11.1 will arrive maybe February 25th. Now, I first thought that 11.05 would be a 10-week patch with respect to the December break, but it looks like 11.07 could be the 10-week patch instead, unless we're wrong about that too, but hey, we'll see how it goes. Now, y'all might have learned by now, 11.1 will take us to Undermine, with probably some of the most wild world building we've seen in the World of Warcraft. As expected, we'll have new delves, note that that's plural. Bran will be sticking around as our delve companion, yay, this time as a tank spec as well. So I'll be curious to see if it's designed specifically to assist healers, or if DPS can use a tank Bran to trivialize delves. There's also a new renown as well, go figure, and curiously enough, we'll get a new dungeon with Season 2, meaning players could be jumping right into this new Goblin dungeon in Mythic Plus difficulty, and I'm sure that's gonna go off perfectly. As for the season lineup, we can expect the 4 War Within dungeons that didn't make it from Season 1 to be in Season 2. We're also going to get that new Goblin dungeon, the Motherlode dungeon from Battle for Azeroth, and 2 more returning dungeons. My guess is going to be Siege of Borealis again, and Siege of Borealis Mirror Mode. Something unexpected though will be driving roadsters through Undermine, complete with ground vehicle physics, which, actually that sounds pretty exciting. I'd like to see how this ends up playing, and if I want to maybe swap to a controller for it. My guess is that the team is also quietly working on making some bigger mini game of sorts involving these driving physics, and depending on player reactions to the actual patch, they'll get a green light, or we'll never see driving again outside of Undermine. And finally, we get Warband Camp Collections, probably a way to add and hopefully change our environments when we log in. Now, knowing player housing is coming in, this is, this is cute. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to complain that this is, hey, coming soon, that's cool. It's just, cute. 11.15 and 11.17 will take us through spring. Now, technically, in the calendar year, that's March 20th through June 21st. And late March, it's not even a month after Season 2 might begin. So maybe we can expect Season 2 to be a little bit shorter than Season 1, which did last for about 5.5 months. But again, we'll see what they have in store for us. They describe this new Nightfall content, much like how they described Siren Isle as new content, but not a new zone like we'll see in the 0.1 patches. Horrific Visions Revisited is bound to turn some heads, some turning away, but for anyone who's been watching me for a while, it was one of the most fun things that I've done in WoW. It was like a single player's dream. So I do hope that they've learned lessons since then, and they iron out all the pain points that made Horrific Visions unenjoyable, like, grinding for keys and failing and wasting those keys. And, I'm sure y'all have other complaints to share, but we've seen the likes of Torghast and Delves, which make examples of how we can and should be able to just, dive in whenever we want and use these keys as rewards. These aren't spent to make an attempt, they're spent after successes, and we just want extra loot. Meanwhile, 11.17 will bring Turbulent Timeways back again as a kind of bonus event because, hey, I guess we just can't stop leveling. However, the timeline goes though, the first weeks of summer, that's going to be around June, that should bring us 11.2 and Season 3, and what I'm going to guess is the final major raid of the expansion. But Dragonflight made it clear that the final raid doesn't mean that there's nothing else to look forward to for the rest of the expansion. Odds are good that a few weeks or a month after Season 3 begins, we're going to learn more about Midnight. Hopefully we won't have been waiting too long to at least get some critical questions about player housing answered. Another interesting twist is that we're going to get another new dungeon. Not sure if it's going to be like a mega dungeon or a regular dungeon, but it's very interesting that for the first time since Legion, we're getting more than one post-launch dungeon. Okay, it's interesting and weird because we're only going to see it for like so long, but I guess these days with dungeons going on rotations, it'll be back soon enough. The fall months will help wrap up the epilogue of the War Within storyline, and we should expect more as we slide into Midnight, but you might want to notice a few things. First is this curious sigil-looking thing, which many have speculated looks like a Hearthstone, and the design is very suspiciously shaped like a house. Also notice how the timeline shifts to this green color, so I guess we can speculate. Part of me feels like, speculating this early is a little bit irresponsible because, it sets up these weird expectations, maybe sets us up for disappointment, right? But hey, dude, they did this, right? They did this on purpose. They did the whole flag thing last time, and we waited a few months for Plunderstorm. In fact, at one point, Big Boss Holly Longdale came out to say that, oh, you know what, that tease, well, it overstayed its welcome, we'll try to not do that again. And it's not exactly the same thing happening here, but in a way, here we go again with potentially an even longer wait before we learn more details. Now, before we continue, let's give thanks to the giver of today's shirt and the sponsor of today's video, Into the AM. They're having a big old Black Friday sale until December 8th, where you can enjoy up to 60% off their entire store. Now, true story, most of the time you see me wear WoW and Blizzard shirts, and otherwise when I'm not wearing that stuff, I'm wearing Into the AM shirts because they're made of great materials, they last for years, and they are hella comfy. And they've got all sorts of outerwear like hoodies and pants for you people who still wear pants, I guess, with cool designs or no designs. Hey, that's cool too. Into the AM is a great brand and I'm happy to partner with them. So click that link below to check out what they got until December 8th and use code SOUL10 for an additional discount. Anyway, back to the timeline. I do have some strong guesses as to what's ahead, and you don't have to be, but I'm pretty locked in. So here's what I think. I think there's going to be a Season 4 of War Within, and it's going to be shorter than Season 4 of Dragonflight. It's going to be something more along the lines of Shadowlands, so cut a few weeks off of that. And we can call it 11.3, we can call it 11.2.8, whatever. Even if the team has been concurrently working on multiple expansions, we've had this kind of dead time, this lull, and it was filled up with stuff like Bullion or Dinar, and we've had a shorter raid and dungeon and PvP season, and of course we had the extra stuff like Plunderstorm and the Mist of Pandaria remix. The shift to the green hue, it's very convincingly fell colored, so it wouldn't surprise me to see a Legion remix, complete with fast progression and zany powers, and probably too many transmog recolors to count. And something tells me that, like the MOP remix, they're not going to offer specific transmog appearances as in like the original Mage Tower skins, or if the Mage Tower as a feature will be in at all. It doesn't sound like it would mesh well with what's basically God mode. I'm sure the Eonar fight though will be fun. And it's not hard to guess this glyph is an indicator of player housing. Maybe this is a special Hearthstone to go, home. But why is it here, placed ahead of the 11.2.7 patch? It'd be wild to think that Midnight would launch before the end of 2025, but the team did say player housing would come with Midnight. So I have a feeling, just like how allied races were accessible via pre-order of Battle for Azeroth, player housing will be available for people who pre-order Midnight. Now, if that happens, that's like kind of insidious, right? It's a little bit dirty, but it'll work. Just take my money, seriously. But let's add in some other reasonable assumptions. So it looks like the expansion is going to be announced late summer. A PTR for whatever's after 11.2.7 may include player housing. And with Season 4, we get the bonus season. We get the Legion remix, we get pre-orders for Midnight, and maybe early access to player housing on live realms. And, probably the Midnight beta and whatever. Early access player housing, I guess it doesn't have to be fully featured. Like maybe there'll be only so many things that we can construct and collect, if at all. Maybe it'll just be a cool thing to do early on to just try things out, or, well, basically beta test it for longer. Because imagine if player housing did launch with the pre-patch, or worse, the start of midnight. I'm being kind of cynical here, but I think Blizzard just wants to milk players by dangling player housing for the sake of pre-orders. We get a chance to give a lot of hands-on feedback before the general launch. It also makes sense to get some of that initial player housing itch out early. That way, when the launch happens, we won't have to feel like we gotta choose between the initial leveling rush and making our first home. Obviously, people will do their own thing, right? And I'm just saying Blizzard might want to make the choice easier by launching housing earlier for their most interested audiences, even if it's not totally launch ready. So it's possible, towards the end of 2025, like a year from now, we can start building and decorating. Making some big assumptions here, but maybe we'll only have access to one room, like a single story house, with only so many possible furniture and decorations to collect. Again, I'm trying to really lower my expectations here, but the full feature will open up with the midnight pre-patch or the expansion launch. And I know I'd eat it up. Other people won't care, of course, but it's totally okay. It's not like housing will depend on grouping up with other people anyway. The timeline of the 2025 roadmap covers all the major milestones of the War Within, coming just short of a possible final patch and season, and it looks like we're in for a ride. We can expect some new features happening with driving. We'll get 2 dungeons instead of 1 mega dungeon, I think. Horrific visions are coming back, at least for a bit, and there's bound to be some surprises, like what sorts of war bands and open world challenges might be coming, and again, what'll happen by the end of the year. I'd like you to chime in with your own predictions, but now, of course, we've got to move on to player housing, whose announcement has already reshaped our perception of the game, at least for me. I've talked up player housing up and down since its reveal, and one of the first things that came to mind was, okay, what now? What is the hunter without the hunt, right? I've been one of the most vocal proponents of player housing since becoming a creator, but I was not alone trying to keep this dream alive. In a recent interview, game director Ian Hazelkasa said that he and the team teased housing to start conversations and discussions, and listen to what people want to see most from it.
Absolutely. I would say we're open to a lot of suggestions and feedback when it comes to World of Warcraft at the moment, but even more so, an in-development feature where, I think one of the biggest moments of anxiety is something when we've been working on something, behind closed doors for a long time, and we start to pull back the curtain. We think we're on the right track. We think we're doing something that's going to resonate with players, but we never know for sure until we see reactions. And so I think we're, trying to hedge a little bit here, frankly, and obviously want to build excitement, but also get some of those thoughts and feedback early on to make sure we're on the right track. And we'll have a lot more to share starting early next year.
Oh, buddy, you're going to hear from us. Now that it's coming, I'm not going to quiet down. In fact, I'm going to get louder, because knowing that it's coming is not the same as knowing what we're getting. There's only so much to learn from 2 big scenes, and I've been having lots of conversations with you folks on stream and in comments and in social media. So here's what we'll do for the rest of today. I'm going to try to be brief, and I'll fail, but there's some big questions that players and fans really want to have answered as soon as possible, even if they're probably not going to do it. But these are the questions whose answers might make or break the excitement. I'll include my usual personal commentary along with these questions, so if anyone over at Blizzard's watching, I'm very hopeful like that. Please share with us your vision sooner than later so you can get the feedback, whether it's good or bad. Alright, question, will we be able to place objects around the home with pixel perfect precision, or will the items be placed in preset locations? Now, from the look of these screenshots, it might be a little bit of both. Wall decorations look like they've been very evenly placed, while chairs and candles are sort of placed randomly, like, hello Stein over on the ground, someone please pick that up, you might trip and fall or whatever. I'm also hoping we can add windows to let light in. The way we interact with housing from a tools and UI standpoint is going to be critical to create this eventual sense of immersion. Games like Final Fantasy XIV, with their housing, they allow for the placement of facades and ramps and elevations to turn one room into several, with different shapes and layouts, and that's an approach pretty foreign to World of Warcraft, which has whole buildings prefabricated, but maybe a simple wall wouldn't be too much to ask for. Accessibility is important. The teaser sets up this initial vision of what I think is a very basic one-room layout, and if they intend to continue reiterating and building on this as they're claiming, maybe it's more important to get this into players' hands with simpler features and tools, as opposed to overwhelming them with a learning curve. The idea of casual versus hardcore extends to housing too, and so maybe we're fine with starting off with a toolset like Microsoft Paint as opposed to Adobe Photoshop. Related question, will our house look the same on the outside as it does on the inside? So, one of World of Warcraft's biggest strengths comes from having a kind of seamless outdoor world, but of course there are limits to the design. If we want a big old house with multiple rooms and hallways, it's going to take up that much space from the outside too. Karazhan is a good example of a building that is definitely not the same size as the instance inside it, maybe because it's magic or whatever, but no big deal. And maybe player housing ought to take a similar route. That way, assuming we'll be able to one day make a house with multiple rooms and floors, we also won't have to contend with setting up a roof and outer facades and so on and so forth. Question, will every race be represented? Now this is kind of a tough one because the team is going to have to kind of make up architecture for more than a few races. Most of the time we deal with human and orc style buildings with a sprinkle of other elven culture and goblins here and there too. So will a Tauren style house be just kind of a tent only with different barriers to act as walls? Or how about Darkspear trolls? What are they going to get? Is it really just going to be wood? What are Vulpera buildings supposed to look like? Or will they have none because that just goes too much against their character? Or will they end up in caves or something? What I think will be interesting to see is if Blizzard makes furniture that respects the sizes of races, as in, proper bed sizes and chairs and doodads that fit, stuff that doesn't make a mug look like a bucket. Another question, will there be a profession for housing, and what will the economy end up being like? This is way too big of a question, but I'll just kind of brush the surface on this, okay? Lots of folks are eager to pick up a woodcutting or a carpentry profession of sorts and start strip mining Ashenvale and Elwyn Forest for resources, right? I would like professions to play a big hand into housing, not the entire thing, but I want them to play a big part, but I actually don't buy into making a whole bona fide profession just for that. I'll do my best to explain why while demonstrating that I think about and talk about player housing way too much. I don't think we should have one or two professions be what housing is mostly centered around. We already have all the other professions who can play a part in creating furniture and decorations and more, and having another character with another profession made just to put it all together, it feels kind of redundant. I'd actually propose if there was a carpentry-like profession, it would be a secondary profession, and it would be linked across your entire warband. So for example, if you want to make that Onyxia's head on a mount, you need to get a metal frame and maybe some chemical stuff to preserve that dead head. So you go to Molten Core somewhere to get materials, you have a blacksmith and or an engineer make you these components, and then you open up this carpentry profession UI. You click on this head mount, you have the materials, and with another click, ta-da, you've unlocked the ability to place one of these giant dragon vanilla style mounts. Then you can hang it up, and with a click you can adjust the properties of this mount. You can customize whatever dragon's head you want based on your achievements. So if you want to change the head, cool, go ahead and change it just like that. But if you want to place a second, a different dragon head, okay, you gotta make an additional mount. So there's a bit of grandfathering in what we've done as players while we use the WoW economy and new content and legacy content to express our achievements through getting these resources. Some decorations can of course be easier or harder to make. Some of them can just be unlocked or given outright through a quest, or finding rare stuff and putting that stuff together, and so much more. I'll be welcome to see gathering be incorporated into housing and tons of recipes added to all of the existing professions. I just think that adding another primary profession, it feels kind of forced, and it'd be kind of weird to have a profession have, kind of dominion over so much of a gameplay feature. Kind of like how Inscription controlled major glyphs, which have since gone away, probably for that reason. Now here's an easier question. Will everyone have the opportunity to get their own house? I'm sure roughly 200% of you watching are like, yeah, we freaking better. Accessibility is king. I don't think there should be any land scarcity, and the last thing we should have after waiting so long for housing is to be told, yeah, sorry, no room. But here's a tougher question. Will housing be built into the world? Will it be like a shared space, or will it be fully instanced? These days, WoW's technology allows for a lot of different possibilities. Like if they wanted to, they can make this kind of a foresty grove area in some zone for a single home or a bunch of homes, and then people can choose any of these preset locations of where this house would be, and their house would just be phased to them. Like, think of how we all went to the same locations for our garrisons, but what we saw was ours. So if like this neighborhood was an Ashenvale, there can be maybe a delve-like portal that we can walk through, and then ta-da, there we are. And we would be able to access like right in the game world or teleport there somehow. Now that approach would be kind of cool, but it's also impossible to satisfy players because they'll probably have in mind like, oh, I want to be in this exact specific place inside Grizzly Hills or the Anoran Plains or Argus. Yeah, sure. Some people don't want neighbors, right? Other people are going to be just fine with having a housing district by the city, so they don't mind neighbors at all. The conundrum lies with people having all sorts of different ideas, multiple ideas at the same time even, and Blizzard will have to kind of pick and choose. Like I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't be surprised, assuming that there's going to be early access to housing, that the initial release of this will just be limited to housing in like the city. So yeah, we'll get like neighborhoods, or maybe we'll get one selection out in the frontier where it's more likely to be a solo instance sort of thing with no neighbors. So the bigger question will be, no matter how it starts, what's going to be the next step? What kind of feedback are we going to give? Another important question, will housing be mandatory? Ian had already said in a statement that there is not going to be, housing is not going to be a thing that we'll use for player power. Now, I'm under the strong impression that it won't be either, but it's a legit question being asked. There's a lot of past history or maybe trauma with garrisons, and a lot of players that don't want to feel tied down to something like that. I think it would work best if housing wasn't even part of a campaign or a main storyline, It's just given that pink triangle treatment of, hey, come here, this is a feature you can unlock, but I strongly believe housing, like transmog and pets and mounts, it should be a choice of endgame that players can freely jump in and out of. They can take breaks or they can outright ignore it. Housing should have nothing to do with like running keys and raids. It shouldn't help you PvP better. It shouldn't help you get optimal gear or gem slots, none of that stuff. It shouldn't even be, again, part of a main story quest or campaign where we have to go visit our house for the next step. Like, I know the video said your next adventure starts at home, but let's clarify that, like, hey, that's just a metaphor. Actually check your quest log for what to do next. But related question, should there be some utility to our homes? This is a tough one because many of us will draw lines at one point or be more relaxed at another, and when we all share ideas, we're going to have all these conflicting takes. Now, personally, I'd like to draw a certain distinction. If we're in our home, whether it's in the middle of nowhere or if it's in a residential district of our capital city, we're still separated from city services like general and trade chat. A mailbox makes sense, crafting tables make sense, but I draw the line at fulfilling public or NPC crafting orders. Guild and personal stuff, like that's totally fine. But if you want to bark and trade, you're going to take a trip to the city, which I think should also always be one portal hop away. No roundabout stuff, no multiple portal jumps, just back and forth to your capital. Some things that I would think would be kind of okay, but not too overpowered. Like, what if there's a special thing? Well, like, what if engineers could make a sort of transporter room? And this lets engineers who have the skill, they can zip to their unlocked locations, and this would be on a separate cooldown from the toys. Like, would that be okay? I don't know. Or what if logging out at your home slowly repaired your gear? I'm not suggesting that to be like some sort of additional perk that you have to earn. It's just something that you figure your character would do while they're in their home. There's like downtime and they can start tinkering with their own stuff. And I'm talking like a really like minor perk, like 1 durability an hour, something cool, but not like a must do. Access to your personal banks, that totally makes sense. Guild banks, not so much. Although actually that's more like a guild hall question somewhere down the line. There's also another fair discussion to have on this particular topic though, because we talk player housing, but who says this has to be a house of comfort? Like, what if I want this to be my war bunker, where I roleplay myself keeping an arsenal of stuff here and I'm waiting for the apocalypse because that happens sometimes. I'm not so opposed to, say, having all the old mission tables here, or having boards that let me queue up for older content like Island Expeditions or Warfront or even Torghast. I know those are old legacy things, but what would people think of that? Does that cross the line to where we feel forced to return home in a bad way, or does it do too much to keep us outside of cities or elsewhere? And I have one more question for now. We already know the answer, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. What we get with this first go at player housing, whatever we get late 2025 or the launch of Midnight, is this it? Is this going to be like a one and done thing like the Garrison? And the team has been very vocal in saying no multiple times. Mythic Plus and Delves, they were game changers in a World of Warcraft where once the idea of endgame was just raiding and PvP and making another character so they can both raid and PvP. Player housing is one of the evergreen features gamers have been waiting for. The last one being the account shared wardrobe system for the most part. This is just the start, and if there's one thing we should expect when it launches, it's gonna be dissatisfaction, wanting. Like, people are gonna be like, man, we wanted so much more than what we're first getting. It won't be everyone, of course, but the scope of housing is limited to our imaginations. Like, dude, people are gonna want underground Batcave-like bases. They're gonna want vertical towers that go up as high as possible, or hallways lined with shields on every wall, or instead of a house, hey, we want to have a tavern suspended in the sky, or we want a flying guild pirate ship, we want an underwater fight club, we want a tree house, but the house is actually a giant castle, and we want a house shaped like dicks. We want dicks all over the place. Someone's gonna make a house shaped like a dick. Watch. That's why they're inviting us to give our thoughts now. And that's why I'm inviting you to ask your big questions and give feedback and, hey, be part of the conversation. I touched on what I think are the biggest questions, but really this is like nothing. We're barely scratching the surface. I just need your help pointing out important details. I'm going to keep spotlighting ideas that I find and think are cool. I'll give feedback to other big ideas I might have different or maybe opposing thoughts to. I've been talking about this for years, and now that we know it's coming, I'm just going to talk about it more, especially as we learn more actual information. That's going to be the show, and I feel like already World of Warcraft feels and looks different from what it was just a few days ago. Like, I'm looking at collections and achievements and accomplishments under kind of a different light. I'm feeling excited to show off my ahead of the curve kills and big collection milestones, or favorite mounts in my stable. I want to see pets that'll be roaming around my house or whatever, and all these other ways to express this under a disco lamp maybe. It's like I have so many transmog slots right now, and in a year or so we're going to see the limits of our customization absolutely explode. So I should probably get to those Battle for Azeroth meta achievements, because, hey, who knows what else might unlock from that. Anyway, let's give a warm thanks to everyone who joined us live, to Patty generously, for generously offering a trolley pet to give away. Let's also thank our beloved patrons, including Patty Cakes, who is probably Patty too. Oh, you slick. And also to you, viewer, you made it to the end. You probably helped to make player housing happen, but all I did was report on it. So if you don't mind, like the video, subscribe for more WoW coverage, catch me live, and I'll catch you later. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.